meeting.
Recording in progress.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Mm.
She's not here. I nominate Dan Erickson. Richardson.
Erickson.
Just lost. Marcy should be here.
You did.
Get periodic
Email.
emails. I just didn't know if they were still functioning.
No, not here. Well, other cities.
Jurisdictions, but they're just keeping us on the mailing list.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the trip to Florida was great.
Yeah, it was. That was fun.
I bought it in the shop. and got it
Yeah.
going.
Just want to let everyone know that we're waiting for our chair to arrive.
You'll want to mute yourself.
Oh.
Vice Chair Schwartz, are you willing and able to run the meeting until our chair arrives?
Of course, but I need to get my agenda. Can you hold on for just a second? I need to get a little bit organized. Be right No Darcy yet?
No, and feel free to just go ahead and get us started. And when she arrives, she'll take over.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And I am pleased to call to order the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Agency Board meeting of July 19th, 2022. And we'll start off with roll call. Who will help us with that?
Caitlin Cook.
Caitlin Cook.
Right, so Timothy McLaughlin.
And there's
I don't need no stinking microphone.
I think you actually do need a microphone. I'm so sorry. We need to get your voice for the record, especially since Paula isn't
Tim
taking it.
McLaughlin is here.
Thank you. Tracy Duggick,
Present.
Stacy Coburn,
Present.
Shannon Salvador, Darcy Long,
absent at this time.
Kathy Schwartz,
Present.
Lindsay Jamay,
Present.
and Dan Richardson.
Present.
I didn't hear Shannon, but I think I see her. She is here?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Great. So is it just Darcy that's missing this evening? Diana Bailey. Did we forget you, Diana?
Diana
present.
Bailey. Thank you.
Present.
Okay. All right. So just Darcy is missing, correct? Okay. Can anyone text her or has anyone done that?
I've texted her.
Okay, great. All right. Well, at this time, why don't we go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Dan, would you lead us in that, please?
Yeah, you bet. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Okay, then we'll go ahead to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda first off? Okay, hearing none.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, I heard Tracy and who seconded?
Stacy.
Stacy. Oh, hello. Okay, great. All right. Any further discussion, changes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Chair votes aye. Vice Chair votes aye. And any opposed? Okay, hearing none, the agenda is approved. We also need to approve the minutes from May 17th, 2022. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Dan. Is there a second?
I'll second. It's Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. Any further discussion, changes, additions? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And Vice Chair votes aye. Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, the minutes are approved. And at this time, I would like to entertain public comment. So anyone may speak on any subject that does not appear on the agenda. 5 minutes per person. Are there any members of the public in the room?
Yes, Vice Chair, there is. Anyone wishes to speak?
Okay, doesn't appear that we have any public comment at this time. Okay, all right. I don't really know what this number 8 is about, but board member comments or questions at this time about anything? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 9, our discussion items. We have a staffing transition in community development and urban renewal programs. So is Matthew with us?
Yes, I'm on virtual. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, there you are. Yes. Hello,
Yes.
Matthew.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mathew Klebes, City Manager, attending virtually. I'm down at the Oregon City County Managers Association. And the internet is a bit spotty, so I'm going to keep my video off so the call isn't dropped. So my apologies there. Alice, did you have anything to lead with, or do you want me to dive right in?
I just want to say it has been my honor to work with all of you. And as you probably have heard the announcement by now, Friday is my last day as Community Development Director at the city. And I will, however, be around. We finalized a scope of work for me to continue on as a contractor to this program and to help Josh Chandler, who's behind me, who will be serving as the interim Community Development Director, and just help with special projects, also help Matthew on a few projects as well. So I'm looking forward to that. And my salaried gig will be a half-time senior planner position with Wasco County. I'm looking forward to that. I'm just delighted to be staying in this part of the world and also have the ability to work remotely and see my family every night. It's been wonderful working here, but missing out on my family life 4 nights a week is tough. So I look forward to continuing the good work. I'm going to take next week off, take a vacation, and then I'll be back in service August 1st.
Yeah, perfect. And just from my part, it's been an absolute pleasure working with Alice and my short 2 months here as the new city manager. And I hate to see her go, but glad that she will still be working in the area. And yeah, as Alice stated, we'll be looking to continue contracting back with her, specifically for several different urban renewal projects, so we can make sure we can continue to support those efforts, as well as the planning department. Looking forward, we are reviewing the job description for the community development director, and having conversations and looking at it through potentially as a planning director, and then a separate economic development staffer. I'll have some conversations and dialogue with city council as that progresses and develops to get approval and authorization. That was something that was not anticipated, so we'll have some budget changes there. And hopefully we'll see that move forward over the next few months. And between now and then, and between now and the end of the year, depending on how things go, Alice will be available to help with those different projects. I think it'll be very important to support the rest of the planning development staff during this time of transition, as well as not lose momentum of several of the projects that, as you know, the Urban Renewal Agency has been working on, as well as the vision action plan for the city, of which there is an update going to city council at their upcoming meeting on July 25th. And so just wanted to report out to the Urban Renewal Agency board on that transition and the game plan going forward, and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Alice and Matthew. How about board members, comments or questions entertained at this time?
Good luck with your new position, Alice. Yeah, I'm glad that gratified and glad that you're going to be working with us on a contract basis, on some basis, however we can get you.
Most definitely. Thank you very much for all of your leadership through the process, through Tony's and all of the buildings. It's been wonderful to have you here. So it's been great.
Anybody else?
Vice Chair, we skipped over one section of the agenda, and that was the staff comments, and that's okay. Normally, I wouldn't mind. However, I did want to
Oh, we did, didn't we?
hear about so many different projects, but I did want to share 2 updates. One is that I still haven't gotten final word on the Tony's Building grant. And usually I had very responsive service from Business Oregon, so I have no reason to believe anything different than I told you a month ago. So stay tuned with that. And our plan this fiscal year is to demolish the building and support some grant funds. So keep you posted with that. The other thing to know is that we have our first development proposal that has a development application. We'll have a hearing for downtown, new units in the downtown. So on the former Griffith Motors property, I may have mentioned this earlier, we have a development application in for a height variation on the property across from hardware, Sawyer's Hardware. And that one will be maximum height that you can do without a variation is 55 feet. You go higher, anywhere between 55 and 75 feet, you need to get a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission. So Mary Hanlon in her development, she is proposing 100 units. They'll have ground floor commercial. She's got a couple of tenants, at least one large tenant already lined up or tentatively lined up, and then four levels of housing above. And in order to accommodate this ground floor tenant, she's needing to raise the ceiling so it's up a little bit higher. So she's requesting a variation of about 5 feet. And so that will come before the Planning Commission, as I said, August 4th. And then after that, she'll apply for a site review. And that application, she'll submit that whenever she chooses. That will be at the staff level decision. So that's coming up. Those are my two major updates. You're going to hear about the two other big projects on our agenda later today. So be silent now.
Sorry to skip over that, Alice. That's what happens when you get, the flunky chairing the meeting. So, at the last minute, right? So, all right. So let's just stay on section 8 for a second, and then we'll go back up to 7 for comments. So I just wanted to complete section 8 there, and of course, thank Alice for her work. But also, just make the comment that it's the city's loss and the county's gain, and the city definitely owes us. So since Matthew was the county's loss and the city's gain, so I'm sorry to see you go from the city and this work, Alice, in your position, but welcome to the county. Thank you. And then just a clarifying question, will Josh be our contact as a staff person, or will it still be you?
Matthew, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, certainly. So Alice will still be that primary contact person for the Urban Renewal Agency and for questions or updates or things that are needed by the agency board. And Alice will work closely and stay in communication with both the interim planner or interim director, Josh Chandler, as well as myself.
Okay, will there be a different contact information?
Yes,
for
I'll send
us?
that out. I'll send that out on Friday. I won't be on the city's email system anymore, but I do have an email address connected to my consulting business. My name of my business is Canon Service Solutions. So kind of boring, but anyway, I do have a new email address, and I'll get that all out to you. by Friday.
Okay. So we're really not losing you. No. Okay, good. Okay. But the city is. Sort of. Okay. All right.
It'll be a period of transition.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other comments, board members? And then we'll move on to questions on the staff project updates. Okay, how about questions or comments regarding the Tony's building or the conditional use permit height variation for the proposed housing unit downtown? Okay. So as always, I'm always a little confused, Alice. So is the housing unit going to be an urban renewal project? Is that what is being proposed? Are they going to be applying for assistance?
Yes, Vice Chair, we anticipate that we will get a grant application in, and you'll hear more about the process for grant applicants here coming up. But one of the things that will become clear as I market the program a little bit more heavily is that people need to have their land use applications in place first before we award the money. And the intent is to make sure that we give money to projects that will actually get built. So we're encouraging everyone to inquire now with me, or anyone at the planning department can get them in touch with me, and we can provide direction on what the next steps are for their proposal. And we can also do a little informal pre-application session regarding grant applicants.
Okay, thank you. That's help in clarifying those steps. So great. Okay. Anything else, board members? Okay. Then I guess we're
Director
free.
Cannon, who was the person that is developing that?
Oh, Hanlon Development, and she is local. Her name is Mary Hanlon. She lives here in the Dalles, and she's owned this property for several years and just been waiting for the right opportunity.
Yeah, I think you might remember that she came to one of our meetings, I believe, and kind of commented on our kind of revised application process. So, yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Are we free to move on? I think item 9 on discussion items are staffing. Oh, no, number B, because we already did the staffing transition. So I guess we're on the Urban Renewal Incentive Program update and discussion. Okay.
Vice Chair Schwartz, I do not have a PowerPoint, but I do have some nice materials that are in the packet. So, and you have a hard copy in front of you, or maybe Vice Chair Schwartz and Diana Bailey, Board Member Bailey, you have the packet there digitally. The staff report for this begins on page 4 of 21. And what you'll see is we have put together some fillable forms for the application package. And that goes on for a few different pages. And then we have, see if we get to page, you'll notice that we have some signature areas and some certifications that are required. And then we ask for a project budget. We do provide a spreadsheet, although I know some applicants, in fact, one that I know of that's already has it on an Excel spreadsheet. And so that can be submitted in lieu of this. And yeah, and I feel like this is pretty straightforward, this application form. And I really like the design that Deb Myhoff came up with, because I think it's pretty intuitive. Then you see the guidelines. So beginning on page 13, a lot of this is content that you've already reviewed in previous meetings and you approved in May. We did clarify a few things, and before I get into the clarification, let me go to page 16. Page 16 has the urban renewal boundary map. So this will be good for people that are wondering if they qualify. They'll be able to look at it. And then if you go to page 5, we looked at a lot of examples for grant programs all over, and we saw some that we liked. In particular, we liked Beaverton because they had this really nice website. So we crafted this application and approval process knowing that we could put this into our webpage content, and it'll be really nice and easy to follow, I hope. And we won't have to rely so much on a PDF, for people to understand what the steps are. So it's light on words and hopefully informative for people to know. So I'm going to walk through the process just a little bit. So step 1 would be reach out to us, as I know a few people have, and asked, am I eligible? And I've gotten quite a few inquiries that way, and what category they might qualify for. And then secondly, how much money is left, and then what the steps are. So we do that overall pre-application type setting. And then we would talk through their proposed development program elements, and estimated costs. And then once we've gotten all the Q&A resolved, and there may be some back and forth there, people would submit their application package. And for the most part, we now receive most applications digitally, so PDFs, and that's perfectly fine. We also have a way for folks to apply online, and plans can also be scaled to be digitally accepted as well. And then we have step 5. If it's less than $50,000, that can be approved at the staff level. So that can be approved by the director. If it's greater than a $50,000 award, it would need to come here. Our plan is to have all the review and decision within 60 days from the date of completeness. So whenever everything is complete. So, and then following that step, we would have a grant award or a grant agreement that the applicant would sign that include all the conditions. Some of those conditions are already outlined in the application and the guidelines that are attached to this package. So that's the step. One thing I had talked to a couple of folks who've inquired, and I want to make clear, is one of the main goals, if I go to let's look at page 14. There is a category there that talks about urban renewal goals. Those are based on the goals outlined in your plan that has been amended off and on between the current date and 1990 when it was originally adopted. Then you set some incentive funding priorities, and those are really important. And one of the things that we set, and I'm going to need to find it in here, we made it a standard that applicants have to, in order to be eligible, it has to be an improvement that requires a building permit with Wasco County. Why is that important? We don't, first of all, we want to scale and be strategic with our investments and scale them at a size that we're not taking a lot of little requests in. But also it's important because if it's just sort of that maintenance or replacing something that doesn't require a permit, then it would not be noticed by our county assessor and therefore wouldn't be eligible to be upgraded in taxing. And that's ultimately what this is about, is trying to raise the property values. I bring this up for discussion because this is something that I put in as a staff member. So I really am interested in your thoughts about it. And I know I've had a conversation already about this. I talked to somebody who's on the call now, who's on the meeting earlier, and we talked about, in that particular case, that project that this building owner talked about, some of the improvements wouldn't need a building permit. It might need a building permit because it's changing its occupancy from a lower occupancy level to a higher occupancy level. So there may be some fire life safety issues that would need to be addressed through that. But then what that project is doing is it's activating a space differently than it was previously. So that too, because of the fire life safety, it would likely require a building permit. So Vice Chair or Chair Long, who's now with us, happy to open this particular topic, this whole agenda item open for your conversation and discussion. But I wanted to raise that issue because it's one that we thought it was important to set a threshold for applicants. People ask me a lot, well, what requires a building permit? I know on facades, the way I think of a lot of things that could fall on your head and hurt your head, for instance, if you're going to be replacing facade improvements or anything like that, a lot of those do require building permits. And so anything that's a safety issue, and then things that are maintenance, like replacing flooring, and some of those things don't require permits. So we can talk through that a little bit more, but I wanted to bring that up and raise it, that's in this packet. That's all I have for you now, and happy to answer any questions that you have or entertain some discussion.
Okay, well, good evening, Chair. Would you like to take over the meeting now?
Completely up to you, Kathy. It's been one of those afternoons, so if you want to keep going, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll jump in.
Go ahead and jump in. We are on item 9B
Okay.
In the agenda, and when it is appropriate, I do have a question for Alice.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, Alice, you talked about up to 50,000, the director would be able to make those decisions, and I'm wondering, is that you as a contractor, or who would that be now in this interim period that would be making those decisions?
I'll need to confirm that with our city manager and city. I'm pretty sure that it would be our interim community development director, Josh Chandler. But he'll be getting advice from me and recommendations as a contractor, and then based on that, they can sign off.
Okay, perfect. That's the only question I had for now.
Nope,
I have a
that's great
question.
question. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a question
Okay, go ahead.
on that point, just since we're on the point of the 50,000. I remember in the previous meeting that the point was $10,000 that was the threshold, and now I see it's moved up to $50,000. Why the change?
I brought that up with the group before it was finally approved. So it was at the last meeting. I don't know if you were there or not, but the reason is the threshold for staff signing off on contracts is 50,000. So we set it at that date. I did bring it up for a question and Q&A and discussion for this group. And at the time, the board was comfortable with it. So it's up to you. What I see is it's a streamlined approach. It allows for staff to make those decisions quickly. But certainly I'm open to your continued discussion on that topic.
It seems like that is a significant amount of money for one person to be making a decision on. And I do have some questions about the approval process as it stands, or as it's presented, especially knowing how the process, say, for the Historic Landmarks Commission goes. You submit an application, the staff provides a recommendation, then it comes to a board and the board makes the approval. This is giving a lot of upfront yes and no's, which I've already heard some of these discussions from business owners in town. I've been told yes or no. And to me, it just seems like there's one or two people making the decisions on how this money is spent when there's more people that should potentially be helping make those decisions. So I guess I'm just curious why this step 1 and 2 kind of skipped over that, or why the same type of process wasn't followed for the Historic Landmarks Commission.
Oh, I unmuted myself. Sorry about that. Let me make sure I understand the question. Back what I thought I heard. Okay, I'm going to lean into the microphone here. So the question, I've lost track where step 1 and 2 is.
That's great. It says step 1, contact agency staff to assess the eligibility. Step 2, identify overall development program, scope of work, and estimated cost. And then step 3 is submitting the application. It just seems like somebody could be told no on step 1 and 2. That could be a viable project that just got turned away instead of submitting the application, going through the process, bringing it to a board to say yes or no to. And $50,000 is a high threshold to be saying yes or no to.
The intention is that it's pretty binary. It either meets it or it doesn't. And the idea of having it, if it requires a building permit, and a building permit, you would check that out, or we would check that out with Wasco County. We would look at the scope of work and your description, and we can both inquire, both the applicant and staff can inquire as to whether these improvements need a building permit or not. And if they do, then they can apply. And if they don't, then they wouldn't qualify. So it's certainly, I mean, at some point we have to set up some guidelines. And it's up to this group to decide if we want to. I mean, the reason I'm recommending that we have something scalable is building permit is a threshold. It's not a particularly high threshold, but it makes sure that we have investment that's going to be noticed by the county assessor's office. It also is of a size that we're not going to be inundated with smaller type improvements. So, but it's certainly not my decision. It will be yours.
Is that the goal, not to have smaller applications? Because when I think of the community and the small businesses downtown, $5,000 can go a really long way for somebody that is trying to fix their storefront, is trying to upgrade something that is inside. So I get a little concerned looking at it, and I can go through all my notes. I've got a lot of comments throughout, but I'm getting really nervous that there is a swing towards making sure that the larger projects get funded. And we had brought up at the beginning that we wanted to make sure that there was some sort of division of making sure the smaller fish, as I like to call it, and the bigger fish, there's some sort of allocation of money that can go to both ways. And the 80-20 rule, even if you said that at $2 million, and you'd split it up that 20% goes to the small businesses and 80% goes to the developers, $400,000 split across the 45 businesses in town is a lot of money. That can increase, like the downtown still needs so much love that I think the smaller projects have just as much impact as these larger projects. And I want to make sure that it doesn't get lost in here. And I have a couple other points, but I'll let anybody else jump in. But
Well, let me respond on a legal issue. Urban renewal money, and this comes up not so much on private grants so much, but it does come up with when we talk to city staff, and city staff are trying to use urban renewal money for fund projects. One thing we have to remind folks is that urban renewal is intended to be spent on capital projects. It isn't allowed for operations and maintenance, except the operations associated with running the agency. So part of it is if it's a maintenance project inside of a building, that's not a capital project so much as a maintenance project. So if you're replacing carpet or you're doing something, maybe even you're replacing your, if it's not an upgrade to a AC system or air circulation system in your building, swamp cooler or something, then that wouldn't necessarily raise the value in the district, which is the number one, that's kind of the goal, is to raise values and get increased investment and prosperity in an area. So there are lots of other funding sources out there. I'm not saying that they're full of a lot of money, but there are other funding sources out there for that type of grant. This urban renewal isn't intended to be spent on operations and maintenance. So
I hear you. In the description, we did say tenant improvements was one of the line items on there. And so going back to small projects and small fixes, a lot of the buildings downtown are stuck in the 70s and they need some help to get going. So I think it's not necessary to have the building permit as a primary component to it, because for someone to put in new floors in a 5,000 square foot building, that could be 15 grand. That's a lot of money. For it to up level the area and up level the total cost of that property, it absolutely will. But that's something that doesn't require a building permit. So I think it's an odd addition that isn't necessarily a requirement, and they should still be heard.
I will answer one more question, then I need to sit back and let you decide as a group. But I want to say that for me and for staff, it is easiest to screen out applications when you have a very clear and objective standard by which, so it's pretty clear and objective on what requires a building permit and what doesn't. And I can get really clear guidance from Wasco County and also based from my own experience. But if it's otherwise, I'm having to do does it meet? I think an argument can be made for one of the applicants who's on the meeting, who potential applicants, to that one would qualify for a building permit, because I think the use where replacing flooring is one of the items. I think that will require a building permit because it will change the occupancy of the area. So I think that particular project will qualify, but that clear and objective is really important, so that I'm not overstepping my authority in that first steps 1 and 2. I'm going to be quiet because ultimately it's up to you. It'll be easier for me to screen if it's clear and objective.
Okay, I just have one clarifying question, Director Cannon, and then I'd like Board Member Bailey to ask her question. So isn't part of the reason that the building permit is a threshold is that's what triggers a reassessment of the building value that we calculate the taxes on? Is that, you're nodding?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Bailey.
I just had a clarifying question as well. On the eligibility, it talks about, here, excuse me, I got switching between frames here. The proposed project and public funding, other grants in the past 5 years. Now, if individuals are not required to come to this board, which has a broad scope and knowledge of all of the various public funding entities, how is that going to be policed? Is it just their own report? I mean, is that how does it stop eligibility? Does it?
Can you point to the page you're talking?
I'm on page 7, the bottom, almost the bottom, second from the bottom. Eligibility of proposed project public funding. Has the property received other public funding or grants in the past 5 years? Is the applicant or owner pursuing any other funding from the City of the Dalles to carry out work? Include details on the source and the amount or being pursued, and note date and time of any public approvals.
The guidelines that you, or the general direction that you gave when you approved the program in May, the only prohibition on receiving other funding is that we don't allow applicants to receive, other than the vertical housing tax abatement, we don't allow any other tax abatement programs to be eligible. So those, for instance, like the Commodore property that has a low income tax credit tax abatement program associated with it, that one would not be eligible. So we asked this question so we know about it, but it wouldn't screen anyone out unless it has that tax abatement already associated with it. It's a way to promote a conversation.
Correct. And the county would have all records of the tax abatements.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
I have a question.
Great
I was wondering, so in step 5, it references scoring the applications. Is there a formal like scoring process that's going to be used? And would it be the same one for the under 50,000 as over 50,000?
We've set this up so you qualify or you don't. So there won't be, we don't have a scoring system set up here.
Okay.
And so it will be, as long as you can meet those basic thresholds, you'll get the money.
Okay.
So it makes timing important. It makes getting in and applying
Sure.
soon important. I think this will be a popular program.
I think so too. That leads into maybe then my next couple of questions too. So sounds like there's a soft launch on July 21st. And it sounds like from the meetings that I've attended and folks who've been participating, there's quite a few people who are already going to be submitting applications. Do you have an idea if applicants that are kind of in the queue are submitting proposals for all of the money, or any idea of how much?
No, I
Okay.
don't.
And then the next question is that it says there'll be some intentional marketing the first week of August. So there'll be a kind of a 5-day. Is there a program for that marketing already set up, or are you kind of creating it and doing it in that week?
The ideas I heard at the May meeting from all of you was you wanted me to do a mailer to property owners, business owners in the district, and that's our intention, is to do that, and also to get a web presence at a minimum. So we can do some other outreach as well, make sure that the newspapers cover it and others, and we can get it out on our Facebook, just all the things that you would typically in Instagram and that you typically use to market. And I've had an offer from a few participants to do some marketing for us.
I have a comment on that particular note. On page 6, and it says first come, first serve basis for the program. So there's a pre-launch that people are going to find out about this in advance. Why was the decision made not to have one day that this program is launched to everybody, and that marketing effort went to all? Because it seems like people are getting ahead of the game. There's applications that are already ready, and there's a lot of people that don't know about it. And that just doesn't feel right to me.
Well, no one has applied yet. We don't have any applications yet, but people who are going to, who are already in the, people are submitting land use applications now because I told them, and because they reached out and I told them, you need to get your land use application in, but they're already going to develop anyway. So yeah. So do they have an advantage? Not necessarily, because they haven't applied for their grant yet, but they have applied. It's only one. Actually, maybe 2. The second one is a business, a smaller business that didn't know about the grant program at the beginning, but they submitted an application and now they know about it. So they intend to apply. So, but yeah, so I've been telling, and it was your email to me that prompted it, is you were saying, how can we get word out? And I said, well, let's tell everyone we know that's interested that they're likely to get, they need to get in and get their land use application done early. That started. Does that answer that for you?
Yes and no, it still goes, for me, it still goes back to some of these requirements and the building permits and land use and things like that. They don't necessarily apply to some of the folks that I know downtown that are trying to survive and trying to make upgrades to their buildings. So, you know, it, for a program that I saw a whole lot of a potential for those in our community who have survived COVID, who, you know, I'm surprised that there's more storefronts open now post-COVID than there were pre-COVID. And I think that speaks a lot about our community. And so my heart really is just trying to make sure that they're not lost. And I think that comes in every question that I'm asking. And I'm stuck on that. I'm just stuck.
So, so I just want to hop in here, Lindsay, and so you're fairly new to the board, and I also don't.
Dar-
I'm going to open this back up to other board members.
Pardon me, Darcy. We
Yes.
can't really hear you. Could you try speaking a little louder?
Sure.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, so I'm just gonna pop in here and make a few general comments, but then I want to open it back up to the board to see how the rest of the board feels. And part of it is this is your first round of funding through the projects. But typically, the point of urban renewal is to make a really big impact on infrastructure downtown and how the downtown looks. So it's not specifically aimed at individual businesses so much as building owners, and then also the infrastructure of the streets and, you know, whatever we're putting in outside. So it's a big portion of that. Of course, it does impact individual businesses. But one of the other reasons that we're launching the way that we are is we have a fair amount of money left, and we picked an amount to put into the budget this year. But the philosophy, or my philosophy as the chair, is that we want to make as big of an impact as quickly as we can. And so if we need to move more money into the budget out of the categories where it's held for future years in order to fund excellent projects that come forward, we will. I think, you know, in some ways the number was arbitrary, but at the same time, when Director Cannon picked that number, it was meant to be high. And I also think the threshold of the 50,000, I fully understand what you said, and I thought you brought up some really excellent points. But part of that is to help business owners, because when they are the small projects, if the director, or in this case, interim director Chandler, can just approve it, you can move quicker than if you need to get on an agenda with your whole entire project, come before urban renewal and go through the step, which can take several months and possibly several visits to urban renewal to process and get the contract written up. So I think the intention was to make it quicker, to make it better for businesses and for building owners. If we're not doing that, if we're somehow making it unfair, of course we want to fix that right now. But I think our intention on everything that we did was, how can we make this process easy, as quick as possible, with accountability still? Because in the past we have not necessarily, well, let me back up. In the past, some of the projects haven't been very visible to the public as to why we would fund those and how they have improved the downtown. And so that's why I think everything is kind of aimed at that right now, but we certainly don't want unintended consequences. So I'm going to step back for a second. If anybody has more comments, if they agree with Lindsay that we're somehow creating unintended consequences, or creating an opportunity that we're not meaning to, please bring that forward.
Okay, I'll chime in just again. I think I understand what Lindsay's saying and feel that there needs to be a little bit of a balance. Like, it feels like there are quite a few folks who knew about it because they followed it, and maybe they had submitted, you know, proposals before. So kind of like, if you're in the know, you get it. If you're not, you don't. And that doesn't feel great, you know? So how do you kind of balance that? And maybe that's not doing the soft launch and then the advertising and then a launch, just making, you know, we're kind of do everything at the same time, as opposed to letting some people kind of know ahead of time. And granted, these are public meetings, but we're all really busy, and it's hard to go to keep on top of everything that's going on and all the moving pieces in our world right now. back to kind of the scoring. So really, even for us that over 50,000, if it meets the metrics, we're just rubber stamping it. We're not really, I mean, it isn't a process where we're deciding, if this is a good fit. It's just, these are the black and white metrics. Does it check every box? If it does, you're good to go. And so kind of that same process for under and over 50,000, there isn't a like scoring per se, just are all the pieces of paper, there, and does it check all the boxes that we need for it to fit?
Only time when there's more discretion for the board is when an applicant wants more than the cap of 700,000. That seems fair for you to have some discretion and more discussion. But our intention is to have a program where we're making a recommendation and showing how it meets the criteria or it doesn't.
Sounds good.
Taking the discretion away from staff.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions?
I guess I just like to ask Darcy, sorry, kind of jumped in.
Go ahead. Yeah.
What is, I guess I'm asking the why. What was the intent of doing a soft launch? What was the thoughts? Why are we doing a soft versus let's just do it?
You know what? We don't even need to say we're doing a soft launch. I said it because tomorrow is the day after the board meeting. And if you wanted me to get this up on the web tomorrow, I could, if you didn't have any changes to it. But the truth is, I probably won't have time until the week August 1st, the week of August 1st to 5th. So why don't we just say that we will do a launch on August 1st to the 5th. Now that'll be my first priority as a contractor. And I'm disappointed that I don't have more up on the web today. So, but August 1st and through the 5th, it will be up there and it'll be available for all. And we'll do a mailer. I want to do a mailer because I think that people will get, and of course on social media as well, but we're going to get more people that may not have access or maybe they're out of town owners. We get something in the mail.
Anyone else?
Chair Long, may I
Yes.
comment? Thank you.
Yes. Richardson.
Chair, you mentioned maybe having a concern, or maybe there was some of us concerned about having unintended consequences, but I guess reflecting on this, it feels like this is actually intended consequences. My recollection of our conversations this spring about this program was that we wanted it streamlined, that there were previously sort of a number of
New York calling, one of those spam.
sort of a number of sort of a galaxy of smaller programs that didn't really get us moved along in a substantial way. At the same time, so we were looking for something streamlined and game changing, and this feels to me that it gives us that possibility, that it fulfills what we had been talking about. And I have a heart for anyone who starts a business. It's an incredibly a steep hill to climb, and I would not want to see small existing businesses going up against sort of large development, sort of game-changing developments for the same dollars. I think that would actually probably do a disservice to them. That's just an initial thought. I wonder if we shouldn't have a separate pot of funding for that and sort of ask our staff. I'm looking at you, Lindsay, because you're who I'm thinking about, or whom I'm responding to on this. What if we ask our staff to look at a separate dedicated pot of funding for existing businesses? And I'm not sure how we would term that, but businesses that have been around for a minimum amount of time, right? A year, 2 years, something, and define something that was game changing to them, some amount of support that would help them stay in and up their game. As you say, 15,000 for somebody that's running a small, business with 1 or 2 or 5 employees it's a different order of magnitude than someone that's putting in dozens or hundreds of units. I don't know if I articulated that very carefully. What do you think about that idea?
I think that's a good proposal. I think if there's a small amount of money can go a long way. And I think in order to, you talk about wanting to make things change and happen quickly, this program is amazing because it will enable folks to take that money. They have to put all the money up front. So it's not, we have to find funding sources first. But they might be able to do things. They have to make the changes. They have to make the updates. They have to do the things. So it's enabling them to go off and running to make those things happen. And I think that is what I was so excited about this program. And I think the developers, I also highly respect for taking a chance on the Dalles and building a ginormous project here. I think there's room for both. And it would be amazing if there was a way to section off some money to make sure that some of the smaller projects just don't get brushed aside. Because when you go down our main street and you see the storefronts, the business and the building owners are the ones making it beautiful down there. And so to be able to help them, I think would be what I would hope from the city. So thank you for proposing that.
The only
So
caveat that I would offer is, and Chair, is that we may need to, I'll just need to talk to our city attorney and make sure that can that be from the urban renewal pot of funds, or does it need to be from a different pot of funds that would be more economic development, more general, that wouldn't have as many restrictions on it. So we just need to make sure that whatever smaller program gets implemented is one that we can use urban renewal funds to use, or we would need our city manager and city attorney to come up with a different funding source.
So just to be clear for the rest of the board, and I apologize for thinking out loud, but I was sort of doing that. I'm proposing that we direct our staff to essentially go full steam ahead with the program they've outlined. I think they've brought back a program that we asked them to. It looks very much like we had discussed, and also ask Josh Ellis, whomever appropriate, to look at separate streamlined small business grant that's specifically for existing businesses. Separate money, separate line item at some point to be developed, on some reasonable amount of timeline.
So I do understand what you're saying, Councilor Richardson. I also just want to point out that that's a function of the city council, the City of the Dalles, the money that we set aside in the city budget for economic development. And I have a meeting coming up with the city manager, and I will bring that up to him, that's something that is of interest here. I do want to also just point out to the group that, that we had options for different ways of doing it, which is why we spend a lot of money on the front end and that it's taken so long in order to roll this out. And because we have set that $50,000 threshold and allowed staff at this point, unless we change it, to approve that, those smaller funding amounts are going to go through much quicker. And basically, they're going to jump the head of the line because the bigger projects are going to have to go through a much more vigorous process and come before the entire board and be voted on. And I don't think that it really is a rubber stamp at that point. I think that those projects are still going to be assessed by us, right, as to whether or not it's creating what we want downtown, but they're more complex, which is why it comes before the whole board. And I know it also feels funny, but we have plenty of money. Like when we talked about this before, it's even if every single person with every single project that Alice knows about applies, we're nowhere near the amount of money that we budgeted for this year at all. And I think the only reason, we were talking about a quote unquote soft launch is that there were the small projects really chomping at the bit. I don't think any of the big projects, they're not gonna, that extra 5 days will not make a difference, because even if they applied at the very beginning on the soft launch or later when everything officially came out, they still wouldn't be able to get onto our agenda and go through the whole process of being vetted any faster, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I think we're just trying to kick it off because we're all excited. but I don't think that this is giving anybody an unfair advantage. It's just trying to get the ball rolling as quickly as we can. And I do feel like it does favor the smaller projects. And I understand what you're saying, but I think the economic development portion is different than the infrastructure and the downtown piece that we're doing, because urban renewal dollars is about holding out tax dollars and then using them specifically, and that's not for small business development, if that makes sense. Those things are both important to businesses, and we love our small businesses, but we can't use these particular dollars, I think, in the way that you guys are talking about.
Darcy, to clarify, then the definition under commercial projects up to 50,000 says 50% matching grant funds to fund smaller building upgrades, tenant improvements, and similar types of rehabilitation projects, building community vitality and prosperity. If you add on the building permit component to that, that takes it to a whole different level than what is described and what we agreed upon. Building permits are not required to do things like putting in floors or building, even if you wanted to put an HVAC system, say in your building, that requires a permit from the HVAC company. If you have an electrician come in, that's the electrician getting a permit. The definition that was presented, it doesn't seem like we're still falling into that same category.
But
Just to respond on that quickly, an electrical permit is a building permit. A mechanical permit for an HVAC system is a building permit. And so that would qualify. And if you are changing your space from, well, let's just use an example that we know about, from a former department store to a different type of use, say a restaurant or something, that would be a change of occupancy, which would require some different fire life safety requirements at Wasco County. So that would require a building permit. Most things will require a building permit. It's the really minor stuff that won't. And we also want to make sure that people follow the code and it gets put in right, and that we can actually, we have a record of inspections. So it's also for accountability. So it sounds like I'm arguing. I don't want that to be the case. I just wanted to clarify that a lot of those things that you just mentioned will qualify.
And we're trying to trigger a tax value reassessment with these dollars. And if we don't have a building permit, the assessor won't reassess the value, which won't increase the tax base.
Chair, we have Board Member Coburn that has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. I couldn't see her. Co-member
I just wanted to comment that Chair Long, that I agree with what you're saying. And I think I remember during the conversation, I had a lot of heartache when we first discussed this months ago about ensuring. I think we had the discussion on local of trying to ensure that, I think I said it, to ensure that that local folks, and then we had the whole discussion on, well, what's local, what's not local, is Mary local, is Sue local, what does that mean? And I think I took heart in the fact that that if we can make this process simple, and if those requests at under $50,000 can flow through quickly, that we can ensure that folks that maybe aren't as business savvy as Mary's of the world, that we can make this happen quickly for them, and ensure that our local community does benefit from these dollars, because that's I think a lot of the reason of why a lot of us are here, is to ensure that happens. But as well as the fact of, if John Frederick were here, I'll say it on his behalf, because I know he would say it. And I find myself doing that often in other meetings as well. Our intention is to make sure that we return to the tax rolls, businesses and dollars that go back to where they've been shortened over the last years. And I think that by using the permit process, it does help ensure that that goal is met. And hopefully we can catch the majority of those folks in that process, and still ensure that at the end of the day, we've met our goal as an urban renewal agency, which is to improve the tax base here locally, hopefully someday when things return back to normal, or whatever normal is, but turn back to the regular taxes. I guess that's the best way to say it, but as hard as it is, I think this is a really good process of hoping to ensure that we reach both ends of that spectrum. And I'm sure that whether it's Director Cannon or whoever else is behind there, as we go through the process, if we find that we're having more requests than we anticipated, we can anticipate and slow the brakes a little bit, or find new ways, or as I think Chair Long mentioned, allocate more funds from a future year.
Anyone else? And if you're in the council chamber, I'm trying to look, but you guys are very tiny. So if I don't see your hand, could you please just speak up? I don't want to miss anyone.
Just have
Lindsay,
one more
are you-
question.
Yeah. Mhm.
On page 9, could you just explain to me, I want to make sure I understand this line item for under the certification by applicant? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Could you explain line item number 5 for me? It starts, I understand that I'll enter into a contractual grant agreement.
Jonathan, I may need your help with this one, our city attorney. We're looking at page 9, the 5th box down on the certification by applicant. It says, I understand that I will enter into a contractual agreement for the project and that concurrent with paying out grant funds, a lien equal to the value of the grant funds dispersed or SDC credits received will be imposed on the property for 15 years after project completion. The lien will be released 15 years after project completion and written notice delivered to the agency manager by the property owner. So can you explain that?
Sure. I believe that the consultant that the agency retained that's been supporting us for this project included some language like that in her initial drafts, but the purpose behind such a checkbox here is to provide the agency with some security for their investment. The last thing that I think anybody on this board would want would be for the agency to be distributing public funds as sort of a blank check. And not to say that we are looking for grant assurances per se, but all grants generally have some assurances tied to them that the money that is being awarded will be spent in a way that makes the most sense and is, number one, transparently used and consistent with the application itself. And so this is a mechanism through which the agency can ensure that whatever money is awarded is spent on whatever the application was for. And so essentially, a lien will be assessed against the title to the real property, which is why it's so important that we have affirmations from the owner as the one who's signing this, that they're signing it with the understanding that any amount that they are awarded will be assessed as a lien against the property. And in the event that the agency learns or is otherwise notified of non-compliance with the terms of the grant agreement, namely, let's say they were awarded $50,000 for some development, but they ended up not using any of that money on actual capital improvements that would improve anything for their property, then the lien would be assessed and it's held against the title to the real property, and the agency would get its money back. And so that's sort of the purpose behind this particular provision. Was there something specific that any board member had with respect to why we included something like this?
Let me give an example because it's a little unclear. The why a lien, I think that would be what we would ask. And why would be, so a question though, it would be, an example I'll give you is we had a former grant program that required an applicant to keep maybe we could clarify the language so it's a little clearer about the why, and I don't think it's clear here. I will agree to that. The one thing though is that, for instance, in this previous grant program, it was a facade improvement grant, And the grant agreement said that the applicant had to keep the improvements in place for 20 years. If they took them out, then they would have to repay the grant. Or some proportionate share. So for instance, if they replaced, let's just give an example, they replaced 10 windows or something, and that's just a silly example, but or they replaced 5 doors and then they came back in with 4 doors later, then again, that's small potatoes stuff, but you get the idea. The idea is that we want it to be a lasting investment and that we don't want the building to be torn out or the improvements to be torn out.
I guess my question comes then on the anticipated funding, because it says grant funds will be committed prior to the commencement of work, but will not be dispersed until the applicant provides proof of payment for the completed improvements. So my understanding was that you would have to pay everything up front. So then this lien, everything would be completed before you even got the money. So is this necessary? Because why would you're imposing a lien on a property when somebody's already completed the project, put the funds up front, already completed the project, and then I guess that doesn't make sense to me. Am I not understanding this correctly?
I'm sorry. Are we reading the same provision? Are we talking about the same provision that talks about? Because I think we had 2 different provisions talking about lien funding. Maybe I could be wrong. I've reviewed this draft a few different times, and so I'm looking on page 9. And which box was it one more time?
Page 9 is the box that has the agreement about the lien, but page 12 is where it says anticipated funding, and it basically says you have to provide all of the funding before you start the project, and you wouldn't receive the money until your improvements have been completed.
So I'm going to take a stab at that, Jonathan. It's okay.
You bet, of course.
The grant funds will be awarded on a reimbursement basis. So you pay up front, we'll give you the grant and pay you back after you've paid out or paid for those improvements to be completed. So that's one thing. The lien is different. The lien is placed on your property after we've awarded all of the grant funds, so that we can ensure that you keep those improvements in place for 15 years and that our money isn't wasted. So in other words, let's just give an extreme example. Say somebody owns a building, Discounts Plus, and we give them a big old grant and then of $200,000, and then they knock the building down a year or 2 later. That would be a lien on the property. So it would ensure that those permanent improvements stay in place for that period of time. That makes sense?
Thanks for clarifying.
I think we need to rewrite that so it's clear.
I would be concerned as a building owner to sign up for that.
To sign up, I'm sorry, to sign up for what? I want to make sure that everybody's clear.
To have a lien against a property for money that was received and proved to have completed a project, then to have a lien against the property, just to me seems like something I would hesitate to do.
I'm not sure that's what we're hoping for or planning on, or even what this says, frankly. So again, as Director Cannon mentioned pretty perfectly, I think. The first aspect of this, what I thought this question was about, was why are we assessing liens against private property? That's actually a function of my legal review of some of the historic documents associated with this agency that have had really soft contract language there that's exposed the agency to liabilities. And ultimately what we're talking about is public money being spent for private improvements with the very indirect consequence of tax increment financing somehow, down the line, making that balance out. And so that is something that we wanted to address going forward. And by we, I mean, agency staff. And the best way that we thought about tackling this would be to assign some liabilities there for people that want to apply, building owners that want to apply, and to use the money for things that the agency never contemplated or never approved. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is exactly as Director Cannon said. It's understanding that this is being these funds will be awarded pursuant to the terms of a grant agreement. And that grant agreement will specify, based off of this program application, that it will be awarded on a reimbursed basis. And so, let's say you retain a contractor as a building owner and they invest $15,000 of improvements to develop some sort of capital improvement financed by this grant. Then you would submit, as the building owner, your invoice from that contractor showing that work was completed, when it was completed, and the quality of the work. And agency staff will, pursuant to the grant agreement, issue a reimbursement. And so those are, I really don't see, maybe I've missed something, but I feel like these are two completely different topics. And so to the extent that it's not obvious that these are two different topics, we will absolutely take a look at this to make sure that this is very clean and extremely transparent, because ultimately it is public money. And so transparency is sort of the guiding principle here. And so I hope that no board member here thinks that this was, or that too conflating. And so we can clarify that, no problem.
In fairness, I think I've taken this feedback and I've written it, that I ought to research and make sure that a lot of our peer communities also do this. And if they don't, I'll bring it back next time and I'll tell you how they handle those situations and what kind of provisions they have in their grant agreements. We used examples, and I just want to make sure that this matches up with what others do.
Okay, so Board Member Bailey and then Vice Chair Schwartz after her.
I just have a question on that lien. Could the lien be reduced over the 15 years by 1/15 by annually, so that, we put in investment in a building, they still get the money, but you don't have it at 15 years, a $200,000 lien on a piece, could there be a reduction in that? Would that make it more palatable to both the taxpayer and the business owner? Just a thought.
Like a depreciation or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And that's something I can research. I can see how other cities do it.
Vice Chair Schwartz.
Oh, yeah. I guess not understanding how all these kinds of titles and liens work entirely. I do take to heart Lindsay's concern about signing up for something like that as a building owner. I'm curious, what would a lien say? For instance, would it say, like if someone were going to sell their building, for instance, because they're changing careers or whatever, and there's a lien on that building, what would it say? You got to keep these improvements. Is it something like that? Is what it would say?
Vice Chair Schwartz, that's an excellent question. That's something that I believe staff and I will have a discussion about when we finalize the terms of the funding agreement and the template that we'll be using to actually award funds. But ultimately, it would say something sort of similar to what you said. We'd like those improvements to remain. These improvements are tied to the value of the value of the property, because the property is valued based off the improvements thereon. And so I think that a large part of this was spawned by this board's discussion 2 months ago, talking about we want to fund projects that are completable and completed. And we don't want to waste, it certainly would be a waste actually if the building that we just improved the facade for was suddenly demolished. And so some of these long range 15-year timelines are really insignificant, compared to the life of a building. And really, if it's not insignificant, then is it really something that this board wants to be investing into? What we're talking about is a significant amount of money that we're giving away, frankly, just giving it away. And so sometimes it has to have a little bit of, if the agency can't enforce the terms of its own grants, then we are truly squandering public resources. And I can give you an example without naming names out of this agency. And I've reviewed the agreements. These predate Alice and me entirely, where a building owner, someone that the agency transferred a building to, entered into a DDA, and maybe some people on this board know what that is, but it's an agreement for the development and disposition of real property. And it's an urban renewal type of contract where we'll give title to real property in exchange for a private owner's or a prospective private owner's plans to bring that building back on the tax roll and have it thriving for economic development. And that's sort of the bread and butter of tax increment financing. So it turns out you can't tax nonprofit entities. And so this building owner took, well, title to the building and then transferred ownership to a nonprofit, paying no taxes. And so the agency's recourse in situations like that would typically be to turn to the contract and say, okay, well, what did we really agree to? We gave this building away, land away, with the hope that it would one day, at the end of its life cycle, pay off and improve the neighborhood and remove blight and all the rest of the urban renewal activities that you all are charged with administering. And now we're in a position of having zero enforcement abilities. And so it's almost as if somebody pulled one over on you all as a board, right? And so part of my job is to make sure that that doesn't happen again, ever. And so it should have a little bit of bite, and property owners should have at least an understanding of what they're signing up for. This is a significant amount of money. That's all. If they need to hire a lawyer to read the fine print, I encourage that, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm biased. But we're not trying to be anything other than extremely transparent. And to the extent that these two provisions might have some sort of contradictions or can be, blended together, that is not our intention at all. And so the points that were established here on this board during this meeting were extremely well taken by me. And so I will go through this with a lens of scrutiny to ensure that there's, clear and objective standards for all of this, and that it's all extremely transparent. That's all. Thanks so much.
I feel like I should clap.
Other questions, comments?
One question, Chair, if I may.
Yes, Councilor Richardson.
This would be directed towards Alice, Josh, and Jonathan. Alice has said that she or you all will be looking at the idea of possibly a depreciating lien or one that steps down over time. Would you consider, while you do that and sort of maybe consider options, think on whether we could look at liens that are of variable terms based on how much of the money is. So, a project that's under 50 might be a 5-year lien. A project that's, 50 to whatever, 150 is a 10-year lien, and project over 150 is a 15-year, something like that.
We can look at that, and it's kind of my pledge to you is that I'll go back and look at all other communities and come back with the menu of options. I hope there will be a menu of options out there of ways to address this issue. And there may be something like that out there, and I'll just give you the research that I've come up with. That way you'll see it, and then maybe something will match up from another agency will match up with your idea. So yeah, we can look at that.
Thank you.
Our city attorney to look at that idea as well.
I take Jonathan's points I take his point. Thank you, Jonathan. And right, someone that has made a substantial or has had a substantial amount of public funding should be held to, seeing that through properly. Someone that's had a much lower amount of public funding might need a bit more flexibility in what happens to the building in a few years down the road.
Question for Jonathan then.
Sure.
So if the lien is on the building, which means if it gets sold, it goes with the building and the new building owner?
It's with the land. And so,
okay, the land.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to ask is the remainder of the lien time, if it's if the building is transferred to a new owner or the land is transferred to a new owner, they can't tear it down, or they can't, so if
it's a restriction on title. It's a restriction on the title, Chair. And it's just like any other restriction on title. It doesn't really matter who the owner is at that point. the agreement is with the land itself, you know, essentially. And so again, you know, this is presented to you all as a discussion item, and you know, I think staff put their best foot forward here, really. And Alice has been working on this for a while, and we've tried to, and this is a big board relative to, you know, for example, city council, and everybody here has invested so much time, and you're volunteering your time, all of you, at coming up with all these ideas and contributing. And so, of course, I'm not gonna, you know, and I did legal sufficiency review for all of this. And so I'm never gonna recommend something that isn't as advantageous to the agency as humanly possible, right? I would never recommend something to you that isn't as robust when it comes to the protections that are afforded to the agency. And so I'm happy to hear that there is some talk of maybe dialing that back a little bit, especially coming from board member Richardson. And those points are very well taken too. And so that's absolutely something that we can look into and to see if that pencils out. That shouldn't be a problem. But I you know, I don't want you to think that, you know, just because I've seen these old agreements in the ways in which the agency has failed to have those sort of protections built in, you know, I'm very protective of the agency in that sense, that I want to make sure that any eventuality that would result in somebody taking this money and using it for anything other than what they said they were going to use it for would have consequences. Generally, those consequences are just going to be, that's fine, do your thing, give us our money back. I think it's really sensible. And so, but again, I don't get to make any decisions, thankfully. That responsibility rests with you all. And so, you know, I trust you to provide adequate and sufficient direction to the director, and we'll get it done.
I have an example that I'd like to run, or I'd like to ask your authorization to use. Let's pretend for a second, let's use the old Chronicle building as an example, the one that's vacant, and it has a former restaurant in it at the corner of Washington and 3rd. So let's use that. Let's pretend that we give a new owner a grant to put in to improve the kitchen and to make it even nicer than it is, and a new exhaust hood and things that all require permits and all that. And then we get 5 years later a request, another grant application or some different investment that changes that into an office or changes it into a retail store that won't use any of that kitchen equipment. What would happen? So I think that is a good concrete example for me, for us to think about, like, what would the consequences be for that owner? Maybe Jonathan and I, if it's okay with you, can run that question. That one seems pretty likely something like that could happen. So I'd like to study that one up a little bit and kind of bring the results back, and maybe run it by some other agency staff in Oregon and see how they've handled that.
Anyone else? Okay, so this was a discussion item, and I would like clarification from staff. If sounds like we're sending this back for some rework, so that is also going to delay the start of this program, correct? Because we need to have everything in place before we start.
I think I could launch this application and I can make some adjustments, because the things I can repeat back what I've heard if you'd like. I heard a question that came up that doesn't necessarily impact this, but the idea of having a smaller pot of funds, maybe from a different funding source potentially for small business. So that isn't reliant, that wouldn't impact anything here. That's the lien, the question about the lien came up. I think we can just keep everything as is, and I can launch it. With the idea that I'm going to come back next month and we can make adjustments to the application, because Jonathan and I spoke about this. You officially don't have to approve the application, but I want to make sure you agree with everything. So my question, let me put this back to the board. Do you feel comfortable as a group with me releasing this the first week with the questions remaining about the lien program and maybe modifying that? Because we won't, the truth is, if we launch it on August 1st, we won't be putting a lien on any properties until much later in the process.
And I want to touch base, well, not touch base, but I sort of want to just iterate what Alice just mentioned. And the reason why there's no formal board action being requested at this time is because formal board action would come with the award of any grants that are in excess of the director's spending authority. And so ultimately, the director, as the agency's manager, has a contracting spending authority. And so these grants would fall under those. I believe the threshold is, I think we established here, is 50,000. And so anything above that is coming to the board for the board's approval. And the board can assign conditions on that approval on a case-by-case basis. And so with the understanding that any applicants for any of these funds would already have to go through a land use process as well, it seems timely that, per the director's recommendation, that this be launched in the next week or so, as opposed to waiting for the next meeting, which might be over a month from now. But there is sufficient legal authority to do it that way. I just wanted to clarify that for everybody.
Yeah, that's great. I was just clarifying whether or not we needed to, not saying I wanted to. Just okay. Yeah. All right. Co-Chair Schwartz.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, I don't want to continue this conversation forever, but I guess one thing I don't understand is why have another funding category for small businesses when we already have up to $50,000. I think the issue is around whether we're going to require building permit type of work. It's not about, because we can give small grants, we can give anything to these businesses, small, large, whatever. It's a first come, first serve. Get the information, and if you want to apply, get on it and do it. So I guess, the issue is really around whether it's truly going to be an impactful infrastructure type of project that's being applied for, not a small business or a large business. So I'm wondering if that is really important work for the staff to do, to set up a separate category.
Thank you, Co-Chair Schwartz. I was actually starting to ask about, I was going to ask if we had consensus for that or not before we had the staff spend time on it. So I think that's an excellent point. I can't see everyone, but can I just have a show of hands of people who want to have a separate pot of money specifically identified for smaller projects? Just raise, okay, so I see McLaughlin, I'm sorry, are you raising your hand? So I see 4 in the chamber. Is that right? 4 people?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the well, I don't know what to call it, on Zoom, and the other 2 in the chamber who do not, correct? Do I have that count correct? Okay.
And if I may, I was not asking for a sort of a full-fledged program. I was asking for more of a conversation among the professionals that they could bring back to us at some point, so that it did not drag down this program, but rather some reflection on how we might also separately have a small grant program that was below the threshold of a building permit or sort of that game-changing project.
Just in response to that, my assessment of law, and I'll confirm this with Jonathan, is that we really can't be spending urban renewal dollars on non-capital projects and projects that don't result in permanent change. I would, as your future contractor, I would kick this idea to the city manager. So if there is consensus here, I'll kick it to the city manager and make it a function of a future economic development program. And maybe some of those funds that will be coming in from the enterprise zone can be used for such a program in the future. And I think it's a great idea. And what's nice about that is those funds don't have the strings attached that urban renewal does.
Okay,
I
so
agree
just
with
for
that.
clarification, do we have consensus that we want Director Cannon to bring this up with the city manager? Why don't we start with Counselor Richardson, say yes or no, and then go around the council chamber?
Yes, please bring up the topic of how we support our existing businesses with the city manager.
McLaughlin, aye.
Jemay, I.
Saldivar, aye.
Over and I.
Tracy Dudzik, aye.
Okay, Kathy Schwartz. Okay, she's nodding. Diana Bailey.
Yeah, conversation is great. Thank you.
Great. So we have consensus. We would like you to do that. Thank you. All right. So I think we have our direction to staff, and it sounds like they're clear on it. Yes. Okay.
Just want to thank the group. This was a heavy discussion. I just was sitting here in awe saying, you were all so intelligent and you came prepared with thoughtful questions, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for your time tonight. I know this is a longer meeting than usual. I just want to say our next agenda item is kind of heavy too. So I appreciate, we do have a consultant here to help with that presentation, Chair. His name is Travis Krueger, and he'll come join me. It looks like Vice Chair Schwartz has a question.
Yeah, just I really have a hard stop right now. Is this next topic just information only?
It's information, and I can brief you later. We're going to be looking for informal consensus from the board. It is not an action item. It will require an action at City Council in September.
Okay, I'm sorry, I do have to leave now, but I'll check in with Alice. Get your new contact info and I'll contact you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Load your. Can we take a break of a few minutes so we can get the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation up online? Would that be okay?
Yeah. How long of a break are you asking for?
How about 4 minutes?
4
That's enough
minutes.
for someone
Okay.
down to the take a bio break.
Okay. So
20.
4 minutes is 7:11. So let's just make it 7:12. Okay, everyone. Take a bio break, and then so the meeting's in recess till 7:11 p.m.
I had a meeting from 2 to 5. And then this one, I started yawning and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm already tired before my 7 hours.
I was up at 6 this morning for a 7 o'clock meeting at the airport.
I'm gonna interrupt for a second. So I'd say don't forget, but some of you don't know this. We are still recording, and those microphones pick up everything.
Thanks for the reminder, Darcy, or Chair Long.
Yep.
Had a big piece of chocolate and a glass of water. I love how others here.
With this less for your.
Excuse me.
Right. So they left for back. I gotta go feed her cats because I left for John Day today. Just to get away for a little while. And they're still doing their house in Europe. Are you still? This is all on me. Can't blame Paula or anyone, me. All I can say is Paula keeps me on track.
Okay, Director Cannon, are you ready for me to call the meeting back
Yes,
to order?
please.
Okay, so
4
I'm gonna go
minutes,
ahead and
4 minutes or 5 minutes?
it's been 5, but I wasn't gonna point that out, so I'll go ahead and call the meeting back to order. Am I missing anybody in the council chamber? It doesn't look like it, but you guys are like ants.
We're all here.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Long and members of the board, I want to introduce our project management consultant. I've told you a lot about him, and I think he may have appeared on a meeting presentation or two. This is Travis Krueger. First time you've seen him in person, and it actually might have only been the second or third time I've seen him in person. Travis has been helping us work with ODOT and work through all the various complexities with the First Street project. And we're in as I alluded to a couple of months ago, we're in a difficult situation right now where we're at a milestone decision point. Do we want to continue working with ODOT on this project and with using the federal grant, or do we want to forego that and deliver it locally? And so Travis is going to talk through that this evening, and happy to answer any questions. The goal tonight, you are not the ultimate decision maker, though the city council will likely not do something you don't agree with. So the contracts on this project are with city council. That's a requirement of ODOT. They're not with the agency. So ultimately with your consensus, informal consensus tonight, we would take it for a decision at city council in September when they have a break or a time off in August. We'll bring it to a September meeting for a final decision. So if you want us to delay, there's no pressure to make the decision tonight. If you have more questions that we need to do more research on, we can certainly come back at a future meeting. With that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Travis Krueger.
All right, well, we'll try to just kind of provide a quick update here. This button here, Alice. So everyone's familiar with the project limits are kind of in this photo, but what we want to talk about tonight is kind of the funding analysis that we did. Give you a quick project status update and kind of talk about funding and then some of the next steps that Alice alluded to. So right now, so I'm Travis Krueger. I'm with a consulting firm called HDR, and Alice brought us on to kind of help guide the project through some of these kind of federal funding hurdles, so to speak. The project at that time was really being led by ODOT. The funds are routed through ODOT. But the project is actually being designed by a firm called KPFF. They're doing a really great job. They're at 95% complete right now. Just a couple things need to be tightened up, and that's basically the retaining wall design and then some of the right-of-way coordination efforts with the properties that are affected, primarily the railroad. So we're ready to really finalize the plans and take it to bid, but we're kind of at a pause here while we try to figure out, get some agreement on how we want a construction project. A little bit of background. This project is a little dated. It goes back to some of the ARA grants, 2009, 2010. I think this project was 2010. So we're really excited to get it done and in the ground. Federal grant was about 1.6 million. And that sounds like a big chunk of change until we kind of talk about some of the costs to finalize things. The big note here is that using that grant, ARA grant, really triggers a federal nexus. And that really brings in a lot more state involvement for environmental permitting and also extended lead time to take it to construction. And that was really triggered by these walls along the street. They were considered of cultural and historic significance, so it triggers a lot of federal permitting.
Salt rock walls that you can see behind the last stop.
I'll use this one. This one worked too. All right, perfect. Okay, so the risk for using these federal funds, the big one to me is it's going to add up to 2 or 3 years to the construction schedule, actually the design schedule and permitting schedule leading up to construction. And everybody's aware of some of the construction cost escalations that we've been seeing in the last year or two. They're really unprecedented. That's going to add a lot of potential costs to the project if that continues and we kick the can down the road a couple years before it goes to construction. And again, the environmental permitting, the right-of-way coordination, and private property coordination, there's a lot more, I'm just going to use the term red tape. There's a lot more red tape to go through the federal process with the grant. One thing we wanted to look at pretty early on, this was Alice's idea of, well, what if the project is just delivered with Dalles staff and the consultant staff, KPFF, and just don't use the federal funds? What does that look like? So that's kind of the analysis that we did, and looks like a pretty good option. So why don't we kind of talk about that a little bit? If it's funded through ODOT and this grant, again, it's going to be probably 2025 or 2026 construction, most likely 2026. And that introduces a big cost escalation with the contractor's bids. It also adds a lot more this environmental permitting and construction monitoring. So overall, it adds about $5 million to the anticipated cost to complete. If we went with KPFF and the Dalles delivery,
we can build it. Goal right now, it's looking like 2024 is very realistic and we could hit that date. It's going to be a much simpler process to monitor the project during construction and all the environmental permitting. And we think, you know, conservatively, it would be about 4.3 million. And that's taking into account the grant money. So at the end of the day, saving. Now this depends on what happens with cost escalations. We don't have a crystal ball, but using kind of today's agreed to numbers, it's looking like you'd save about $1 million, about $800,000 to deliver the project. So yeah, that's the big kicker. It's really the schedule that's adding these costs.
That include the $320,000 we would pay back?
Yeah. So to Alice's point, some of the federal funds have already been spent with some design. So kind of similar to the discussion that Jonathan had, there's no lien, but we would need to give some of that or give that money back basically to ODOT to reimburse the feds. Next steps. Me, the analysis that we've done, it looks really beneficial for the Dalles to deliver this project and to kind of avoid the grant, the ARA grant. And Alice's point, there would need to be a repayment there. It's right around $300,000. APFF is actually looking at putting an amendment together to do the tasks that ODOT was previously going to do, although a lot of them would be much simpler, like the environmental permitting is still there, but to a much lesser degree than if it went through the federal process. And yeah, 2024 construction is the goal. So move through there pretty quickly. Anybody have any questions on any of that?
Well, I just want to add that we vetted this. We ran this quickly by Dave Anderson. He might still be on the call on this meeting remotely, and ran it through our team, our staff team. We ran it through our new city manager, Mathew Klebes, and really did some testing of this idea. And also it's never I've had a wonderful relationship with ODOT on this project along the way, and I've bragged about them. You've heard me say that. This has been a really pleasant, one of the more pleasant experiences I've had working with ODOT, and they've been supportive and helpful. It's just everything takes a long time with ODOT, and it's that much more strings attached with federal money, and that isn't ODOT's fault. So I just don't want to disparage our funding agency. Given some of the assessment we've done is, would this give us a black eye in any way for receiving future funds, federal funds? And what I can say is we are the oldest grant in the state of Oregon. This one's been around the longest and hasn't been built yet. It's from a different package of funds that had a lot of, from what Travis tells me, a lot of requirements that had we been a little bit more knowledgeable. Most other agencies that use this funds, because of all the strings attached and requirements, used it for maintenance, strictly maintenance, one of those easy things.
Paving.
Yeah, and for our agency, we took on a big project and it has a lot of complexities to it. And so as a result, and we also had some political dynamics in there in the middle of the project as well, and some cost escalations. So it's taken a long time. And I don't think, we believe that we will still, we believe we will have a positive relationship with ODOT into the future. And I don't think they're looking at us negatively for this. They may be relieved, frankly, as long as they get their money back. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I know that the council will care deeply about that issue.
You also had a worldwide pandemic, 3 years of at least setting us back.
Can you explain a little bit when we talk about deliver the project to somebody who doesn't live in your all world? What does that mean? What does that mean that the city is going to do, that ODOT, I mean, beyond the dollars, I get the dollars part. I'm not sure I understand deliver the project.
Thanks. Great question. Delivering the project would mean to me and to Alice, taking it to the point that it can be bid, so contractors can bid on it, and then awarding the bid. So doing some of that management with the contracts and the contractor, and then seeing it through to construction and, final project closeout. So for the Dalles staff, that would mean, and this is part of the conversations with Dalles staff, is we need to have somebody from the city out there stopping in every day, just seeing how things are doing and checking on quantities that have been installed, that sort of thing. There needs to be somebody within procurement that can get it out to an open public bid, so that's also part of the process that ODOT was going to take care of, that now Dalles / KPFF would need to put together and make sure that's taken care of.
So then just as a follow-up, Director Cannon, I'm assuming then there'd be some KPFF would prepare some list that says, here's what we're going to do. Here's what the Dalles is going to do. And everybody kind of knows what their responsibilities for, and the Dalles, and whether it's Matthew or somebody else, they'll go through and make sure that we have the right skills and people available to.
Right. Good point. Yeah. And if we terminate an agreement with ODOT, then we have to, we're going to keep our same design consultant, then we would have to open up a new contract with KPFF to keep them on. That would outline a scope of work and all the responsibilities attached to that work and the costs. And then we've talked to Dave Anderson and Mathew Klebes about the staff capacity that we have. We do have a construction inspector already on our staff that can assist if we need specialized inspections, and we do sometimes for certain types of materials. We can hire that out, and KPFF has some of that expertise on their team, and so that could be helpful. So I see this being a lot more nimble, and we won't have the. Sometimes it takes a lot of energy to move the big ship around, and we're a smaller ship, and so we can move around a little easier and faster. And what I like about it better, and that is one of those intangible things. It is tangible. Is that I think we have a closer relationship with the property owners and the business owners along there. And this will be a lot easier to manage those relationships, manage the project, because it'll all be locally delivered, and locally we can track all those relationships and keep up with things much easier.
Was this funding part of the Lewis and Clark and the dock funding that came years ago?
I think it's the same.
Yeah, I think
grant.
It's from the same part, our pot.
Yeah, the
Federal.
project has changed significantly, and I think there was a tunnel in there at one point.
There was. That has been abandoned. There was also a Washington Street addition at one time. And then we looked at the Tony's building for a mall type of thing there. So, yeah, I was curious.
It's seen many iterations of kind of scaling back. Absolutely.
I know you walk the First Street a lot too. I've been taking my morning walks on First Street, and it's a hazard to walk on that street. It's just so in such disrepair, and it's a tripping hazard waiting to happen, and it needs to be fixed.
Question. Since the fund, it seemed like this project before was kind of high on the list because there was federal funding. And so the project wanted to move forward because we had some money that needed to be spent. And now with this shift, would this project still be kind of number one on your list of things to do? Or would this project potentially be scaled back to some extent? Because I agree, tripping on First Street is a hazard, but I know there were more grandiose plans for First Street. So if the money isn't going to be funded as much from a federal side of things, would this project be scaled back to then use the additional funding on some other project that was on your list as well?
I think that's an excellent question, and it's one that I don't necessarily have an answer to. But if you want us to explore that and come back and give you an answer on that, all I know since I've been in the program a couple of years is that there's been a lot of pent up pressure. Let's get this project done. But I don't think anyone's paused and said, is this the most important one? Is it more important than 3rd Street? Personally, I think it is, because it's a hazard, and I don't think 3rd Street is a hazard in the same way. If Dave Anderson were here, he would probably tell you, hey, we have very, very old water and sewer lines in there that need to be replaced. Some of those might have be clay pipes, for instance. And it's also an entry point for the cruise traffic. We have tourist traffic that come through that area. So it just adds to the overall appearance that people have. But I think that's really a discussion that isn't for me to lead. I don't know, Chair, if we want to ask Public Works Director Dave Anderson to speak about the value of this project a little bit, to answer that, round out my answer a bit.
Yes, this would be a good opportunity to have him comment on that, please.
Good evening. This is Dave, and I am the Public Works Director for the City of The Dalles. I think maybe some folks on this particular board and I have not actually met in person yet. So as far as a prioritization between this project and First Street, Alice is correct. We do have some very old utilities actually under both streets. We have a lot of the downtown water lines do date back to the early 1900s. We have old sewer lines. A lot of those were replaced when we did the Second Street Streetscape project. And we would look for doing those upgrades with either First or Third. I think the thing that probably lends some priority to First Street is the investment that's been made thus far and the value of the engineering. I believe Travis mentioned we're currently at about 95% design on this. That is of value, and that is a significant investment to have gotten us to this point. And that is something that hasn't yet been done for Third Street. And there would probably be, I'm going to make a poll number off the top of my head, but $1 million to $1.5 million in engineering, I would estimate, to try to get Third Street to the same point of progress that First Street's currently on. So I think in my mind that adds to the priority for First Street. We do have a lack of maintenance that we've done on First Street because this project's always been on the books. We haven't gone in and done any significant street or pavement maintenance. No sidewalks have been updated for a number of years, and I think contribute to the Alice mentioned tripping hazards. So for me, I think that my vote would be that we continue to move forward with the implementation of First Street rather than at this point backing up and revisiting Third Street. None of those conversations have happened with any of the property owners on Third Street for quite some time. So it really would be starting over from square one.
Thank you, Dave. Any other questions before we go back to the presentation?
I have a question.
We're finished with the presentation, so we're
okay.
we're open for questions at this
All
time.
right, great.
I have a
Lindsay?
question regarding the environmental studies. It sounds like there's less that would be done with this project as opposed to keeping it at the federal level. I know that environmental studies can be cumbersome and a lot of red tape, but there's also some good to them too. Do you guys know what the difference would be? What would we be losing out on in the environmental study by not doing the federal ones?
Some of the same monitoring during construction still needs to happen because there are significant, cultural areas of concern out there. So that would still need to happen. And that's already kind of triggered at a state nexus level because of some reporting that's been done. So that would still be covered. Also, you could probably kind of speak to some of the related kind of cultural projects that you were wanting to include.
Yeah. One of the questions that came up at the state level, I know we could move quicker because of our existing relationships with our Historic Landmarks Commission. That wall is listed as a resource on our historic inventory. One might wonder why, but it's been around a long time. So we would need to run, in any event, whether it was ODOT running it or whether it was the city running it, we would need to run the question by our Historic Landmarks Commission to make sure that they are comfortable with the design solution, basically replacing that wall, not keeping it intact anymore, because it's going to fall down at some point. So we need to replace it. What do we replace it with? How do we reduce risk on property owners who might develop on those sites in the future, that sort of thing, or if we develop it into parking lots for the future, those sorts of things. What can we do to preserve the history while, and one of the trade-off ideas we had talked about, and I've talked to Eric Gleason a lot about this idea, was to do some mitigation. So we're going to replace the wall. What can we do to honor the history of this area? So how can we incorporate some design features that would, that particular block between where the wall is very prominent, this used to be Chinatown. So what can we do with the design? And can we put some placards on a new fence, you know, that ugly fence that we have there that we'll replace that with something nice, but can we get some placards, or can we incorporate some design into the concrete, some concrete marks? For instance, there is a symbol, I've been told by Eric, and I read it in an academic journal, that there's a Chinese symbol for the Dalles that somebody had back then. And can we get that stamped in the concrete along the way and get some interpretive information in the concrete or on some placards? So what can we do to trade out replacing that wall to get some greater ideas? And the name is escaping me and I'm embarrassed by that, but there is a local writer, her first name is Marilyn, and her Ernest, Marilyn Ernest. We brought her in to give a presentation to our staff, and she was delighted and excited about this idea of incorporating the history. So this is something I wanted to do no matter what. But my smart consultants sitting here said, Alice, don't talk to ODOT very much about it yet, because we may need to do a trade, to a mitigation trade. And so keep your cards close. Well, if I deliver it locally, I don't need to keep my cards close. I can just talk to you about it and get you excited about the ideas. I would certainly not want to manipulate our very astute and smart Historic Landmarks Commission and say we're going to do a trade, but these are some things we want to do in any event. So does that make sense?
It is. So it sounds like there aren't necessarily less environmental studies that would need to be done, but maybe the finished project doesn't have as many strings around it as it would if we went through the federal funding.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so some of the same things still need to take place. For example, during excavation of the wall, somebody needs to be out there to make sure that they're not uncovering something of real significance, as an example. So that would need to happen either scenario, but some of the other more expensive, quite frankly, tasks would go on.
Chair, I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you for being here this evening. Hey, just want to make sure I understand this because it's sort of counterintuitive. So you're reporting to us that the federal funds, the remaining federal funds, if we keep them, will cost us more, obviously in time, but also cost us more money than essentially they're worth. It costs us more to spend that money than to send it back.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's going to cost more to use the funds at the end of the day.
It will be faster and cheaper if we return the federal funds. The repayment of the 320, that's an assumption. We're assuming they're going to want that back as opposed to.
They've told us.
Thank you.
Cracked it.
Given the 95% design, so in other words, the nearly ready to put out to bid designs, is there any chance? Is there any conversation about trying for 2023 as opposed to 2024 for construction in 2023?
Some of the long lead time tasks are right away coordination, and that takes a while. No matter who's doing it, that's going to be somewhere between a year and a half. So that's kind of the critical path at this point, which is why we're trying to kind of make a decision on the direction we want to go, so we can kind of get back to that task.
My last question is: are there any aspects of this we haven't discussed such that it would make it, arguably worthwhile to keep the federal funds?
I think if they were 3 times as much as what was awarded, then it'd be a different conversation, a much different calculus, so to speak, for comparing the two options. But probably when this project first started on 2010, that grant would get you a lot more at the end of the day, but yeah, so it just simply doesn't quite pencil out. But it's mainly that leg to get to construction. That's really where most of the cost is going to come from.
So it was a $1.64 million grant in 2007. So that was real money back then.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Just
Not so much now.
advice I received in about 2004, 2005 was Alice, don't apply for a federal grant for local on behalf of a local government under 10 million. And the reason was there's that much more bureaucracy and cost, and ODOT, they charge for their time. So I don't charge for my time against the grant, but they do. And so it costs every time. So it's not necessarily worth it under 10 million. And we didn't have that, anyone providing that advice at the time here in the Dalles. That's okay.
Thanks.
Any other comments from board members or questions? All right, so we're looking for consensus for what we would like Director Cannon to take back to City Council, correct? Okay. So, so just to take up a poll of the room, I guess, if is anyone not in favor of making a recommendation to City Council that we let the federal grant go and repay it and move on our own? Okay. Seeing and hearing no one, I think staff knows what they need to do now.
Okay, and I just want to let the council members on the meeting here know that we're likely to come back September 12th or the second meeting in September with, we may take it straight to a recommendation. We may not even have a discussion. We just bring it as consensus from the board and move forward that way.
Right.
Terminate the agreement. For your time on this.
Thank you for putting that together.
Oh.
Okay. Is there anything else for the good of the order? All right. So seeing and hearing none, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you for your time and your thoughtful comments and participation, everyone.
Thanks, Josh.
Yep. See you next month.
Recording stopped.
Thoughts?
Yes, I did.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. We're gonna put a nice metallic one in.
Ooh, when's that?
3 months.
Oh,
Yep.
I'm sorry. I mean,
I just went in
Yeah.
last
I'm
Thursday.
thinking it's got to be something.